Welcome to Soul Healing for the Empathic Entrepreneur. So, why empaths and why do I talk about the entrepreneur that is an empath? Well, one, I say this a lot, empaths feel everything. And so, if we understand ourselves and if we understand that we actually merge and we're constantly taking in information and it is actually our strength, and in some ways, it could be our kryptonite if we don't understand how to utilize our ability to feel everything. And so that the fact that we feel everything, it means that we kind of function in our entrepreneurial journey in our life slightly differently than those who are maybe a little bit more in the intellectual side, and they don't necessarily feel everybody's emotions. And so when so this is why I kind of talk about certain things in this group so that we can empower ourselves and that we can understand ourselves in a way so that we can create our life and our business. So that's the reason why Soul Healing for the Empathic Entrepreneur exists. And today we're going to talk about the spiritual ego. I know it's kind of like a taboo topic, but first of all, I think it's interesting for us who are, on what we might consider a spiritual path. And it's also, one thing I guess I'll say about it is that, when we think about the ego, it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just something that exists. Like as a human being, we all have an ego. And essentially, what ego means is how we identify. I am, and my name, I am a yoga teacher, I am. And so, in some ways, like on this planet, we can't necessarily function if we don't identify with something, It's like, I remember coming from the ashram and doing a lot of spiritual practice, and I just like would look at myself in the mirror and like, what is the point? What is the point of clothes? Why can't I just stare at this leaf? And like, so our ego serves us because it gives us our ability to play roles that we're playing. Like if I disidentified with myself as being a mother, then maybe I wouldn't take care of my kids. So ego is not necessarily a bad or good thing, but if we understand it, then we can understand how it can positively and negatively affect our life, if we can say it like that. And one thing is, if we don't understand, first of all, that we identify with being something, right? And especially in this community, most of us identify with being spiritual, whatever that means, meaning to say, we're not just here to live our life and kind of get by. We're here to, like, why are we here? Like, who am I? Where did I come from? Like, all of this contemplation of like, how did I get into this body? And like, what is it, So this spiritual seeking is, if we were to look at the definition for spiritual, it's that is looking just also like into like what we call the soul or what we call the spirit. And again, these are all human definitions, but we kind of feel like there's more to life than just the 9 to 5, to getting up, to feeding myself, to surviving. There's something about why I'm here and like, what's the purpose of it all, right? And we won't really ever know, but that spiritual practice is that. So then when we think about, okay, so what's a spiritual ego? So if I identify with being spiritual, right, then my ego will say, I am a spiritual person, I am. And again, even though that may be true, where it can become tricky, especially if you've been meditating a lot and you've been doing a lot of spiritual practice, it can get tricky because it can sound very, very rational. And so I was talking to somebody the other day, a really beautiful soul sister who has magnificent gift of healing, and she was going for something she really wanted. And you know, it didn't kind of like, she had a plan, and it didn't necessarily, the action she took didn't necessarily pan out the way she wanted. Like, when does that ever happen, right? Do you do something and it doesn't always work out the way you want? Like, and here's what I would identify as like her spiritual ego said. Her spiritual ego said, well, I guess the universe was telling me I wasn't ready for that. So I thought, okay, so this thing that you know you are born to do since you were young, all of a sudden now you're not ready, like, and you've been doing it for the past how many years? Like, you know, pretty much your whole life. So that's how sometimes the spiritual ego, this thing that, okay, I identify as a spiritual person, so now this identification is telling me. And here's what the ego will sound like, because ego is always trying to separate itself. Either it's too big or too small. So I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not capable, I'm not perfect, I don't belong, and I'm not significant. So if anything that kind of comes to your mind is in that kind of tone, then you know it's coming from your egoic structure. And again, your ego can work with you or against you. So if your ego is telling you these things, then it's pretty hard to kind of create a life you love and a life that you feel fulfilled if your ego is constantly telling you, I'm not worthy. And so this moment, right, when what I would see as her ego saying, oh, obviously the universe is telling you you're not ready for that. Ooh, that sounds so spiritual, and that sounds so like insightful and intuitive, but really it's the freaking ego that's saying like, yeah, you're not worthy yet, you're not enough, you're not capable, right? So it's good to kind of understand when the ego is speaking, and the ego is speaking when it separates itself from your, you know, again, it's like, oh, we use all of these words and then it sounds, but it's like when it's separating itself from what you know deep down in your heart to be true. All of us, we come on this earth, and you know, and again, this is a perspective, but it's like all of us come down on this earth, and we kind of all know we're here for something. And some of us will listen to that, and some of us will ignore it. But when you've always known something to be true, like especially when you're younger and you don't have so much identification with what you should be doing, whether you should have a 9-to-5 job, whether you should have a house and a family in the suburbs, whether your kids should go to private school, like all of these things, right, that we can have a structure, an ego around, meaning to say, I identify myself with. And again, I'm not saying what's good or what's bad, but there is also, and if you're on the spiritual path, you know this, there's also a deeper calling. Like, I'm here on this earth for something, a purpose. I got a purpose, right? Like, let me know in the comments if you know that. And it's just this deeper knowing, because we also know as spiritual seekers, like, okay, I maybe I'm not just this human body. Maybe there is something more to this existence to me than I am seeing and then I am identifying with. So there is another part of us that doesn't come from Google, doesn't come from this, what society is saying, doesn't come from what our parents told us. It is just this deeper knowing. And so this is where we can kind of discern when our spiritual ego is talking and it's using like this beautiful language, like, oh, the universe is telling me I'm not ready for that. Where it's like, okay, that sounds very spiritual, but guess what? That's your freaking ego saying like, dude, you're not ready, you're not capable, you're not enough. And all of that is normal, right? It's just that when we can't see it and we can't observe how the ego is identifying it, then that's when it gets tricky. And You know, another interesting thing is like, for example, I've been meditating for many years, and we can be sitting in meditation. I teach a meditation class, and I was doing all of these like silly things for meditation to get us into our actual experience, to get us into real time. And you know, it's not maybe not the typical things that what you might think of as a meditator, like sitting and being serious. You know, like we were being silly and we were being playful and we were using our body and we were moving in a certain way. And sometimes we can be sitting there and just right in front of our eyes, we're like, oh, I am meditating. You know? And it's like we are thinking we're meditating, but actually we're just identifying with being a meditator. So, like, this is how it's very interesting how the spiritual ego can start to kind of work its way through. And the way we see it and the way you can kind of hear it is when it's like, I am this, I am not this, you know? And it's coming really from this place of like, you know, so it's, you know, just because I've been meditating for whatever, how many years, decades, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking I'm meditating, well, guess what? I'm not really meditating. I'm just, there's a thought very close to me saying I'm meditating, when really I'm thinking I'm meditating, if that makes sense. And then we can practice, yes, meditation techniques to watch our mind saying that we're meditating, to watch our breath and all this. And then all of a sudden, you may know this, there's a sense of silence that happens. And in that silence, that's where that thing I'm talking about, that knowing, that deeper kind of calling comes to us. It's like these moments where like life is like, go do that, oh, go do that. And it's more from that like that childlike place where it's like, oh my God, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that, oh, that, like, it's exciting, and it's we're curious and we're scared at the same time, and we don't know if it's going to work out. But that's what intuition is. It's like we will never know until we follow it. Have you ever done anything where you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this? There's no actual like reasonable reason why I'm doing it, and then you do it, and you're like, oh my God, that changed my life. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. You know, I left that thing, I went to that thing, I traveled this place, right? So, you know, that's when the spirit and our soul is guiding us. And when the spiritual ego is guiding us, it just sounds very reasonable. It sounds very reasonable. And it sounds, and we use the spiritual jargon. So, one thing that is interesting in the yogic philosophy is the way that we see this whole kind of like, why are we living this life? Who are we? What are we doing here? Like, what, all these questions that we don't really know the answer to. But, you know, there have been many spiritual masters who have sat in silence and kind of come and let the answers come through. And one concept is that, you know, God, or whatever you want in yogic philosophy, it's the dance of Leela. God hides itself to find itself again. So here we are in all of these individual egoic structures, and we all identify with all of these special gifts that we have here on earth. And God is kind of hiding itself in one of itself to find itself again. So we come down here and we kind of forget. We forget that, oh, I'm part of it all, whatever that means. I'm part of it all. Then I'm this kind of all-knowing being that can literally, it is of creation and is the creator, right? We kind of forget that. But the game is we come here to remember it. And so what's interesting is when you become an individual, then that individual will identify with its individual traits. So if we understand how all of this works, and again, I'm not saying I'm like this expert and I'm this guru and I know everything about the ego and I don't have an ego. I'm not saying that. But I just want to kind of contemplate the topic, right? Because if we do have an understanding of ourselves, and that understanding allows us to feel more free, or to feel beauty, and to feel fulfilled, to feel in alignment with our purpose, because we all know that we all kind of have even glimpses of the sense when we feel in alignment with our, what we can call our soul, or with God, or with life. And we've all felt how we're like, whoa, I'm way off track. I just, like, this is not where I'm feeling is my purpose, right? So if we start to understand these principles, right, and the way we are functioning, then maybe it will allow us to kind of integrate more these understandings. Because here's the interesting thing, is the spiritual ego can start to learn. There's so much information out there. There's so much wisdom and knowledge out there, and we can accumulate, and we can read all the books, and all of that knowledge, we can have it kind of in our head, and we can have it memorized and copied. And so the spiritual ego can kind of think like, ooh, I'm really wise, right? But what I was listening to one of my spiritual mentors, and they were saying, like, before wisdom comes love. Like, if we're going to fully integrate all of this wisdom and all of this knowledge and all of this deep empathy and compassion and everything we talked about, this oneness, all of this stuff, we have to discover love first. And we have to be love, which is what we are and how we were born. And if you notice, any child, any baby, like, there's no knowledge there, there's no wisdom, but there is so much love. Like, just stare into the eyes of a baby. Because here's the thing about babies. They will not, like, what's that game, you know, when you play the staring game? You will lose every single time against a baby. Because babies, that they still have that, they still are coming out of the essence of love. So they're just gonna stare at you, and they're not thinking. Maybe their baby mind is kind of like, oh, so interesting, but they're not judging. They're not necessarily having this whole story and comparison. Like, most of it is like this kind of pure innocence, curiosity, you know, and they're just like looking at you. Like, do that once, you know, and again, without being intrusive. And of course, if a child does not want to stare at you, then you don't stare at them, you know, like, just you know, you're respectful of people's spaces. But, like, more often than not, you'll get children who are just watching you, like, without judgment, just watching you and taking you in, and actually, even more than watching you, feeling you, and maybe also seeing your energetic field, right? And then they become fascinated. Like, I had this with a child where he was just like always like making eyes with me across the table, and I, you know, there's a moment where he was staring at me, and I looked away, you know, but he didn't look away, you know. And it's like, when you feel that innocence, and when you feel that moment of connection, and when you feel that love, it's like, okay, that is not of an ego. That is like, and I'm not saying when you're children you don't start to form that, but you get the sense and the feeling of like, oh, here's a moment of purity, where it's just like, there is this just innocent interaction. There is not this comparison or this thought of like, oh, this person is weird and creepy. There's none of that. It was just like, oh, let me just take you in, like, you know? And so we can start to understand, like, that integration of love will allow us to integrate these concepts. Just because we read 1,000 books, you know, everyone knows, like, you can read 1,000,000 trillion books, but even if you know all the answers to enlightenment, there's many books out there on enlightenment, you don't become enlightened, right? It just kind of happens when it's meant to happen, or if it's supposed to happen, or, you know, it's just what we can call divine timing. But So I think that's important, the discernment between the path of love and the path of fear, or the path of love and the path of separation. And that's the other thing that ego is, it's interesting because the ego will always, and this is where you can also discern, will always separate itself. And sometimes the spiritual ego will do that, where it's like, oh, these people, like they're not vegetarian, or well, I don't know what, and whatever. I'm not saying you do you, okay? But it's like we will think either we're higher or lower than. The ego will separate itself in that way, where it's like, oh, I'm more than or less than. Oh, my spiritual practice is superior to yours. This spiritual practice is the one with all the answers. Listen, I have been studying many different teachers. I don't know what the answer is. Like, I really don't. Who does? Like, really, who does? And if you claim you do, it's like, that also might be the ego, right? Because who really knows? Like, really? Who really knows what the F is going on up in here, Right? But we can make observations, and one thing that we've learned here, at least on this planet, is there's something that happens when we sit in meditation, or we sit in silence, or we sit in observation. We get a little bit more attuned to life as it is, and not life as we see it. So I gave this example before, this tree behind me. If we experience life as we see it, I'm like, okay, pine tree. Somebody told me it's a blue pine. It's taller than my house. It's beautiful. It smells like pine. It has pine cones. But life as it is like this thing that has this crazy network of roots that are connected to all the other roots underneath, and all of these nutrients, and these, like, it's just these molecules that are coagulating together to create this thing called tree, and this creating oxygen and carbon dioxide, and it's this consciousness that I don't even understand or know of, unless maybe if I kind of sat with it and felt it and experienced it, and we kind of have to go into silence for that experience to be integrated or felt. So if you're just kind of listening to that from an intellectual point of view, it's not really going to make sense. It's like bug here. It's not really going to make sense to you, because here's the other thing about the ego. It kind of thinks like, well, if I don't remember that, if that's not in my memory bank, then it must not be true. Think about that. If I don't remember it, right? So just think how limiting that is. So if I don't remember the galaxies in this universe and the stardust and the black holes and all that, then it must not be true. Like, so that's very, the ego will limit itself to what it knows. Outside of that, nothing else exists. So we just experience things from the way we see it, like the ego sees it. Oh, we're kind of missing out on pretty much, like, so much of what reality is. And I'm not claiming to know what reality is, but if we only go by our memory, it's pretty especially as a human being, because there are stars, there are lions, there's the ocean, they all have memory. And they've all experienced, and there's this planet, and then these planets around all of these different other planets. This is just one planet that are experiencing the universe in its own unique experience that we will never, ever really know how Jupiter is experiencing the universe, or how Mother Earth is experiencing the universe. And just listen how your mind's like, of course I know what the earth is experiencing, because we see it as we see it versus how it is. So that's important, I think, to kind of just at least understand, that this is functioning. And then when we understand that, and at least we can observe it, and so then it doesn't limit our experience to potential and to the experience where I think is important, the experience of love, right? If I go into a room and I feel separate from everyone, and I don't feel worthy, or I don't feel enough, I don't feel capable, it's a very kind of lonely and sad existence. But if I feel connected and I feel like you are me and I am you, and we are all here on this planet doing God knows what, but I want to connect to your heart and your soul, it's going to be a different experience. And we have free will. So whatever you choose, it's cool, you know? All of this, everything I'm saying is really just a discussion. I'm not trying to point what's good, what's bad, what's God, what's not God. Like, I'm just, exploring what this whole ego and spirituality, like, what is this? What is it all? What is it? And then it allows us to just kind of remain curious, so that we're never really close to the full potential of life. And we will never know the full potential of life, but at least we don't close ourselves, if that makes sense. I want to go to my notes and just see what is I wrote down here. There's kind of like a map, I think that is interesting, that Michael Beckwith has mapped out, and it came to him, right? And he was talking about the stages of spiritual practice, and the first stage is life is happening to me, like, life is happening to me. The world is, you're a victim, and you're blaming, shaming, or guilting the world for doing something to you. Stage number 2, life is happening by me, where I'm manifesting and I'm creating, and this is like I'm making it happen. Stage number 4, life is happening for me, where I start to welcome in and I receive my experience, and life is happening as me, where I am no longer separate. I am one with it all. And so, that's also interesting, because I think that will kind of give us a reflection of how we're functioning in this world, and if our egoic structure is functioning in a way that is serving, our highest good. And I think, again, all of this stuff is concept, but like, when we're really on purpose and when we're really aligned, we kind of know it, and we kind of feel it. And when you feel other people who are kind of living that way, they also kind of know it and they kind of feel it. And so, not that our ego will never be part of that. And here's the thing, like, I guess this is the last point I'll make, is that we're never going to not have an ego as long as we're here on earth. And who knows, even the soul comes down here to kind of, it identifies with being a soul, and the soul having a purpose, and the soul experiencing its life. But as long as we're here, we'll always have an ego. But then I think what we can learn from this is maybe we can learn how to collaborate with it, because the ego will always be there. And especially, here's the thing that I want to tell everyone, is whenever you're going for what you want, and it's the thing that deep in your heart is right there, there's always going to be a level of resistance. There's always going to be part of your mind that tells you you're not enough, you're not capable. Maybe not in those words, but words that feel that way. I don't belong, I'm not capable, I'm not perfect, I'm not significant, I'm not worthy, right? So if we understand that that's just part of our being human, we can collaborate. We can begin to collaborate with that part of us that doesn't feel enough. And we can begin to collaborate with, well, okay, since I do have an ego, how am I gonna, like, how am I gonna identify with? What am I gonna create? What am I gonna receive? How am I gonna start to allow myself to be one? And I think the most simplest thing, and it sounds almost too easy for us to even comprehend, but is to practice silence. Like if you've ever been in the forest, or if you've ever been in the ocean, and all of a sudden, or you've been in nature, and all of a sudden, like, you're not thinking of anything, you're not identifying with what you're wearing, you're not, that can help us attune to the bigger part of who we are, the one that kind of intuitively knows I'm not just my name and my job and all the roles I play. And so if I listen to that and I say yes to that, it usually leads me down a path that I feel in alignment. I feel like I'm on purpose. And for some reason, that seems to be like what we're all kind of searching for. Like, why am I here? And maybe some of us are not. Maybe some of us are just like, I'm just here to wake up and go to my 9 to 5. But I really don't feel like anybody I've talked to, they're always searching for what is beyond me. If you talk to anybody, everybody's kind of trying to figure it out, So let me just recap. I talked about, the spiritual ego not necessarily being a good or bad thing. Ego is simply who I identify with. I am, right? So if you have a spiritual ego, I am a spiritual person. And that's not a bad or a good thing, but it gets tricky when we don't necessarily can hear ourselves identifying with, I am a meditator, I'm a yogi, so I'm this way. And like you start to think and act based on what you identify with versus what you may feel to be true in your heart in the moment. That makes sense. It's like if you ever go to an ashram, or if you ever go to a certain culture, maybe everybody in the collective is wearing like a certain color, and they're all wearing their mala beads, and they all receive the host with the right hand or the left. Sometimes that is an identification, right? And then that means I'm spiritual. But then maybe they're sitting there and they're judging everybody because that person is blowing their nose, and that other person is like walking in late, and that other person, like, why is their hair like that? Why do they have tattoos? Like, right? So just because we are acting the part doesn't mean that we're not having some kind of identification with it all. And sometimes, when we move from the heart, it's none of that stuff. And I'm not saying that stuff is bad or good. I'm just saying that sometimes we can misidentify by, okay, if I'm doing the mala beads and I'm doing the prayer, then I must be more spiritual than somebody else. And we don't really know that. We don't know if the person that is homeless and that chose to come here and do their work to transcend what it's like to be homeless as a human, we don't know, if that person is more spiritual than, like, there's no less or more. Everyone's just on their path. So where it gets tricky is when the egoic structure starts to sound very intellectual, like, oh, the universe is telling me that I'm not ready for that, when really that's just the ego kind of speaking and sounding very spiritual. Or like when you're going for what you want, but then all of a sudden this spiritual ego kind of like, oh, let me detach from that money that I want, or that work that I want. I'm just gonna like practice detachment. And really in your heart, you know, like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing that. And I'm supposed to be getting paid for that, because that way I can kind of continue to spread what it is that I need to do here on earth, and to benefit everyone around me, you know? What else did I talk about? And you know, this concept of like, okay, like, you know, one concept, yoga concept, you know, what is this? Why do we even have egos? And it's like the practice of life itself hiding itself in itself to find itself again. Like, why do we do all of this? You know, why do we go through this life? And so, you know, the dance of Leela is God hides itself in itself to find itself again. So, you know, we're born in this purity, and then we kind of have all of these different layers of I'm this and I'm that and all that. And then we kind of remember, we come back and remember, oh yeah, right, I am all of it. That's one concept. And then the other thing that I said and I thought was interesting was Michael Beckwith's, his what do you call it? Different stages of spiritual growth. Things are happening to me, so I'm a victim of my circumstance. Things are happening by me, where I start to learn how to manifest my life and make it happen. And then things are happening for me, where I start to receive and surrender to life. And things are happening as me. And that's maybe the stage where our ego is not necessarily running the show. We're just sort of allowing life to, we're recognizing that we're back into the oneness of life, the harmony of life, whatever that really means, you know? And so that's it. So you can maybe kind of see people on earth who are kind of, they found that oneness with God, you know, and often they're laughing a lot. And at the same time, they're like these spiritual warriors. And I'm not, you know, I'm not putting everybody in a box, but I'm just saying they have this capacity to understand the deep pains here on earth, and the capacity of not worrying so much about themselves that they don't go out and make change in the world. And then at the same time, in moments where they're just simply being, it's like they have that playfulness. I think about the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, you know, and again, they still have egos, and they still identify with themselves as being spiritual people, but they're not overly identified with it. They're collaborating with their ego to discover again who they are and what life is about. So that's it. That's, you know, the contemplation. I think that is interesting to you know, interesting, the spiritual ego. Now, if you are interested in having a container where you are on the spiritual path and you're trying to, you know, create practices and strategies and discipline in your life to create the life you want, especially as a spiritual entrepreneur, then DM me and let me know you're ready for a breakthrough yoga coaching call. And on that call, we're going to look at what's keeping you stuck. I have this, what do you call it? This practice that I do with all my clients at the beginning it's called the 3-level clearing, where we start to look at the body and the mind and the energy, and to see where, like, all of these structures, these egoic structures that I'm talking about, have imprinted, the ones that hold you back from the life you really want to live. We're going to look at that, and then we're going to talk about like the program, the 12-month container that I offer, and like how can we together collaborate into creating the life that you love and surrendering to receiving what is there for us already, and becoming one with life. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm there, but I'm saying that we don't heal alone, as my teacher always says. And so if you are in need of a spiritual container where it is practical and where you're going to get strategies for your spiritual practice that bridge the gap to your business, then DM me and let me know, Jamie, I'm ready for a breakthrough yoga coaching call, and we'll get to work. It's no joke. The first call is already going deep into where the practice that will help you, move out of your stuckness. So that's it. DM me and let me know. And that's it. And if you have any comments, any big takeaways, let me know. If there's anything you want me to talk about here in this group, let me know. Otherwise, have a beautiful day, and I will see you guys next week, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I sometimes go in this group or on my regular profile. And also in the summer, I'm thinking of going live noon instead of 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'll see you all next week. Bye, guys.